monitoring of the control plane of our service, bandwidth on demand. And if you see from the title, I'm talking about multi-domain monitoring. So this is an invitation to all of you to join the multi-domain monitoring. Of my presentation, I'm going to show you one slide of what we have said last year in Utrecht at the BOD workshop. I'm going to talk about the importance of control plane monitoring. I'm going to depict what's the current monitoring status, what are the goals for monitoring, what options do we and do you have, and what are the future plans. So this is an old picture because it was from last year's presentation. As Kostas showed yesterday, this is more or less the architecture of bandwidth on demand. So on the top part, you have the web GUI and the lookup service, and then each domain, each IDM from each domain is contacting those two components. If we're talking about control plane monitoring, then it stops here. So we don't care about the underlying network. What can we monitor? Obviously, we should be able to monitor every component. But then again, there are some difficulties. Why is it important to monitor the control plane? First of all, the interested parties, and especially the MDSD, wants to know every time when the service is up, when the service is down, and probably what has happened. It needs to be done before the users notice it. So it can send out emails or notifications that currently this domain, for example, is not able to receive circuit reservation requests. We want to make sure that every service component is operational in terms of control plane. And for the MDSD and the interested parties, we want to get notifications about failures. We want to know when something has gone wrong, and then receive an email or see a dashboard. We want to know when something that has gone wrong has recovered. And then eventually our goal is to prevent from requests that could potentially fail. Yes?
If you say you want to get notice, do you mean you want to get a trap via from a hardware equipment in the network, or do you want to get something like a hint to a dashboard?
Let me go back to this one. This is the network.
Yeah.
Okay. For the bandwidth on demand service, the control plane is the underlying software and the components. You could say that network devices belong to control plane in terms that they play a role in establishing a circuit. But as I'm going to show, we can do many combinations, and we're quite flexible in that. Strictly speaking, this is the data plane is the path. So the control plane are the mechanisms of Autobahn or other software used.
What's wrong with this one?
No, it's from an old presentation. Of course, yeah, you could monitor the devices, but as I'm going to show, there are some issues there. So, what we want to monitor, and what are the considerations for the bandwidth on demand service? Well, the service is modular in the sense that there are many components that interoperate via web services. Namely, there are CNIS, which is the database for storing the network topology, and then it's Autobahn, which in turn has modules, the IDM, intra-domain manager, the DM, the domain manager, and the TP, the technology proxy. So if you want to say that you want to monitor the service, you have to monitor all these components. But then there are several TP implementations. Of course, there is the Autobahn TP implementation that's based on a template. There are vendor TP implementations, like the one that Dante is using via Junospace. And there are custom TP implementations. For example, someone could choose to develop a TP based on Netcom. And then the most important thing is that the service is multi-domain. So in each domain you have different policies. This software is not on a giant server. It's inside the domains. So sometimes what we get is this. We go to the domains and tell them, we want to monitor your devices, your servers, everything around the bandwidth on demand service. And usually we get this answer. No, thank you. We have our own monitoring system. We don't want you to get inside our domains. So we had to move on. So we set up an Nagios instance, which comes in 3 flavors: the testing, the user acceptance testing, and the production. We call it MD Nagios, multi-domain Nagios. And for the time, we do checks only on the Autobahn GUI, which is hosted on bodportal.geant.net. What checks do? We do ping checks to see if the host is up. We check the 2 major web services that were on the top of the architecture, the lookup service and the web GUI. And those 2 checks are called SOAP checks. So we query the lookup service and see if the WSDL responds. And the same is with the web GUI. And then for everything that goes wrong here, we send notifications via email to the MDSD. So the MDSD knows for Bod Portal when it's down or when the 2 basic services are down. Now, most domains, they have their own monitoring platform. And most domains monitor their bandwidth on demand infrastructure. So what we're asking today from every participant is share with us your monitoring status. Do not necessarily give us access to your devices, but share with us what you monitor, your data. And what we want to do is to monitor the control plane for all bandwidth on demand enabled domains in one place. And that's the multi-domain Nagios. And today I'm going to suggest 4 different options which can be combined so as to achieve a flexible, adaptive, continuous, effective, and simple monitoring for the control plane. Those are the 4 options. The 2 first do not require any domain intervention, whereas the 2 last require. And I'm going to show in detail every option. So the first and obvious is ping checks. For example, we can let the multi-domain Nagios instance ping GRNet's IDM. So we know when GRNet IDM is up or down. Or any domain's IDM. Well, in some cases, and in case there are strict security policies, a firewall filter maybe has to be altered or an access list. But it's the simplest form. The next option, which requires no domain intervention, is to get the IDM's list from Autobahn GUI. Every IDM is contacting the Autobahn GUI, and then the Autobahn GUI knows which IDM is up.
Just one question. Does it scale to non-autobahn? Can you in theory check control plane components from an SA?
With ping checks.
Yeah, well, with the methods we presented.
Yes.
So it's not necessarily limited to autobahn.
No. It's not strictly Autobahn. And that's what I'm going to show in the next slides. So, for example, you could have, for the case of Dante, they have their Autobahn platform, and then they have Junospace. Junospace is their TP. So we could have for Dante 2 checks, one for the Autobahn platform and one for Juno Space. And then you know if the IDM is up or if the TP is up or down. The next check, we designed it with Costas. We get the IDMs list from Autobahn GUI via a simple Python SOAP script. And for example, we have 10 IDMs and we check against a predefined list of 11 IDMs. So we see that an IDM is missing and bring it up to the monitoring system, to Nagios. The next two are Nagios plugins and require domain intervention. Some of them may require policies or firewall scripts, firewall rules. And the last one, NRP, requires the remote script setup, which is, if you have a strict policy, it's not recommended, but I will show a case that could be used. So ping checks are very easy to implement. Maybe a firewall rule or an ACL has to be altered. Then the Python SOAP client plugin gets the domain's IDMs from the GUI, gets all the active IDMs, compares it against a list of all the IDMs that should be there and raises an alert or a service status. And then we have the NSCA, which is the proposed way of doing things. The NSCA stands for Nagios Service Check Acceptor. What is the Nagios Service Check Acceptor? Nagios can monitor, it has two basic terms, hosts and services. So a host is like a server, and a service is like the Apache or MySQL. What can you do with NSCA? You tell Nagios not to actively monitor a component, but to passively accept this component's status from this module, which is called NSCA. So in the multi-domain Nagios instance, you have the NSCA server, and in each domain, you have the NSCA clients. This is a solution for domains that deploy Nagios. So you make some configuration changes in your Nagios instance. This is called event handler. So on some event, on an event change, you send a notification to the giant Nagios instance. And what's worth mentioning is that this method is getting notifications only on state changes, whereas Nagios usually polls for every 5 or 10 minutes. Now the last one, which could be used in case a domain does not have any monitoring infrastructure, it's called NRP. And this method implies that you install a plugin in your IDM, and then the Géant MD Nagios instance queries this plugin. This plugin performs the checks and sends back the data to the central instance. As I said, it's not the preferred method for someone who's already having monitoring. We could use it in cases someone does not have monitoring and wants to monitor his IDM via the MD Nagios instance. This is a rating I did for all the different options. What I focus on is the accuracy and the setup ease from the domain. So with ping checks, you just check if the host is up or down. You do not have internal info if the IDM is up or the TP is up or not. And then it's very easy to set up because it requires no domain intervention. The second option, the Python Nagios plugins, which queries the Autobahn GUI, it can give you some more details in terms of, you know, when an IDM is up or down. It requires no domain intervention. And then the other two methods, to me, are more accurate, with the last one being the most accurate because you get into the IDM and get its status. And the NSCA method requires some script writing from the domain, and then some Nagios alteration in its monitoring configuration.
One comment, perhaps ping may not be so easy to set up because I know some cases where pings are not allowed. in the
Yeah,
network.
yeah,
So perhaps
yeah.
we
That's
have to take this into
that's why I mentioned that it could be blocked by firewall or an ACL. And if you want to have the big picture, this is how all of them are combined. Imagine that the domain has its own Nagios instance. The simplest thing we could do is NSCA, and the most accurate. So the domain alters slightly its Nagios configuration and sends service checks back to the Géant multi-domain Nagios instance. This could be combined with a ping. The difference is that NSCA is mostly used for service checks, whereas ping is used for host checks. NSCA could be used for host checks, but it requires some alterations. If the domain doesn't have Nagios, the multi-domain Nagios instance could use NRP. And then we have this solution, which could be used at any time to get the IDMs from the Autobahn GUI. Do I have time for a short? Great.
But I still, I'm still wondering, looking at self-net or not-net, in the previous slide, how, how we could have this applied to non-autobahn domain, or what it would change. I mean, you surely have some servers and things running the software that could also push some NSCA messages.
Do you, well, I would go the other way. Do you allow pings? Okay, that's the first step.
And I think our NOC uses Nagios already.
Great.
Some monitoring. So it would be very easy to also send that to other
Fantastic.
trusted parties.
Great. Great. So, Bettina, to answer your question, this could not only be a bandwidth on demand server. The local Nagios instance could monitor the devices, so it could send back service checks for the devices. We don't want domains mostly don't want Géant to get into their network and do stuff. Yeah.
Yes, the Python source client, the Python check that you do on, the domain registering. So, couple of questions. How frequently are the domains registering to the,
Yeah, I think Costas.
Yeah, it's configurable, but it's typically in the order of a few seconds. But
Few
if
seconds,
they
okay.
send an update to the portal that's analyzed.
And the other thing is, obviously, as Heidi was already asking, I think, does this work also with the NSI domains? Will they register in the same way to the pod account? Will this work also for them? So that would be interesting to probably they don't.
Probably no.
Probably
Okay.
not.
Yes, that would be. And yes, another thing, yes, and obviously do we get, obviously I imagine, I mean, we do get logs from Nagios that tells me exactly for how long the domain has been down, put in monthly service reports and all the rest, so that we can have, an idea of what's happening within the month, and then we can, correlate failures
Mm-hmm.
with unavailability of domains and these kind of things.
Yeah.
I believe is-
Yeah, and I'm going to show towards the end of the presentation how you can bring all this information back into the Autobahn GUI.
Okay, good.
Moving on to, okay. Okay, so for those of you who are not familiar with Nagios, this is the Nagios dashboard, let's say. So on installation, you have checks on localhost, the server that Nagios is installed, and then you add host checks, and for every host, you add service checks. Right now, what I've done is I have added a host check for a server I have on the internet, and then I have added a service check for this server. It's okay, which means this is a ping check, and you get the details, the status information. Ping is okay. When the last check was performed, for how long this status is in this state, it's for 20 hours. And if I have failures, how many attempts have been performed by Nagios to reach the failure. What's worth seeing here is that, going back to the presentation, imagine that this server is a domain Nagios instance. So the domain is monitoring this server. And then you have the multi-domain Nagios instance where you want to get information about this server and this service. So here I have implemented NSCA, and I'm sending the status information for this service back to a supposedly being multi-domain Nagios instance. So I have this host, which is the same as the previous Nagios instance. The X here means that there are no active checks. There are only passive checks. So I get from my status is what NSCA tells me that the status is. If I go here, it says checks have been disabled. And then if I go here, active checks have been disabled. Only passive checks are being accepted. So if I go here and shut down my server, let's give it some time. Okay, let's force a check. The service is critical, and the status information is that the host is unreachable. As we said before, imagine that this is a domain Nagios instance. So now NSCA on the background has sent this information to the supposedly being multi-domain Nagios instance. So if I go here, it's critical. So the domain sends the information to the central instance. And this instance has no idea what this service or this server is about. It does not ping, it just accepts the NSCA messages. Any questions on this? Okay. What we are designing with Costas is we have designed the Python SOAP plugin, and then Costas has made some alterations to the Autobahn code. So there's a new web service right now, and we can get the IDM status, which you can see here, and it's going to be really soon in production. And then if we go further in the future, in Géant, we want to upgrade from Nagios to Isinga. Isinga is a Nagios clone, and it began from a group of Nagios developers that disagreed with a core developer, so they developed Isinga, which is much more flexible. It has enhanced features, It has, the good thing is that it has the same configuration with Nagios, so the transition from one to the other is almost transparent in terms of host and service checks. It has much better UI. It has a larger developer support base. And then there is this Isinga, let's say, plugin or application, which is called Isinga Web. And what's amazing is that it offers a REST API. And you can do many things with the REST API. For example, you can have 30 checks in your Nagios instance, correlate them, and then send via REST API this status back to Autobahn GUI. And both Isinga and Isinga Web have many things that Nagios is missing, and perhaps one of the most important for us is different authentication methods like LDAP or MySQL. And I have set up an Isinga instance. It's the same logic with Nagios, so you have host checks and service checks, but the UI is totally different. Under the hood, there are many, many new features. So if I go to Bot Portal, for example, I see that the host is up, and then I have set up some service checks for the HTTP service, and it's up. And I have also set up an Isinga web instance which is totally different UI. So you have this control plane, this control menu on the left, and you have the checks on the right, and you can do dashboards. You can offer your users different views. So you can have many LDAP users and give them different permissions or on different services. And Isinga Web does not require any configuration in terms of host or services. It takes the configuration from Isinga. So the same check, the HTTP check. You can view the details. You can have relations between checks. And perhaps I did not mention something for the deliverables. Both from Nagios and Isinga, you can have availability reports. From Isinga, you can have SLA reports. So you can get this information and bring them to service monthly deliverables. And last but not least, as Isinga Web exports all the checks into a REST API, we could have something like this. This is a draft I made with Bootstrap. You could have on the left your menu, and then you could have alerts live from Nagios. So you could get information about your services or your hosts. And probably through this you can figure out if a service request will fail or not, and why. Any questions?
Morning.
Your the alerts you mean in Nagios? In here the REST API via REST queries, REST API. Well, that you can. Nagios doesn't work with SNMP traps. It rather works with SNMP queries, but I'm pretty sure there's a plugin, or we can develop a plugin that catches the traps and raises issues or warnings. So Wayne, you can configure, I mean, for our case, we have configured SNMP checks, so we know when an interface is up or down in our Nagios instance in GRNet. We don't use traps in GRNet, that's why we haven't bothered configuring SNMP traps in Nagios. But you can get this information out of Nagios because they're stored in a database. You can get this information out, especially for Isinga and Isinga Web via REST API, which is really useful if you want to bring this information into dashboards or into the actual GUI of the service.
Yes, I would just to ask, basically, wait, that might be something you can right now, but it's timescales. How long do you think it will take to, for example, have the pings up and the Python check of the IDM so that we can, initially have, because at the moment, unfortunately, we don't, as you know, we don't have this kind of monitoring. We really need it. And
Okay.
also the report, if we can have, also, I believe it will be fairly simple, but a way to report on availability of domains in the month on our monthly service report on BOD, because I think it's becoming, increasingly, important to have this information for our NOC
Right. Right now, there is the multi-domain Géant Nagios instance,
Yes.
which is in production,
Yes.
and it monitors the bot portal. So if you go there and have credentials, you could get a report for the last, I think it's up for 6 or 7 months.
But the domains.
The domains. The Python check is in place, which means that I think in the next version of Autobahn, it will be integrated.
During the next, not the next version, next patch that will be up.
Next patch.
So you don't need anything
No.
from the participating entrants.
No.
This is the Autobahn.
No.
What if we pair with subnet or not net? What does it require?
In those cases, we could begin with ping checks to get an idea if their hosts are up or down. And then we could move on to NSCA. Send us, since they have Nagios, that's fantastic. You just, let me show you some configuration. You just want one line, which is called event handler in your local Nagios instance. So when an event comes up, you fire a script, and this script is send NSCA. So when something goes down, you fire the script and then send it to the central instance.
Okay, and because I think the ping check, if we have the if pingers are allowed inside the entrance we can set it up as soon as possible.
Yeah,
Basically,
I mean,
if I just have the IP addresses and just
I can do it now.
just start pinging them
I
and know that at least the domains are up. I think this is something we really need
Yeah, I mean,
very soon. And
for our remote participants, that's my email. Send me your IP addresses and I will do it by the end of this workshop. It will be in the testing
I
instance.
think it will be great.
And then I will ask for a transition to UAT and production.
So you need
Perfect.
the IP address of the virtual machines hosting Autobahn.
Yes. We're interested in IDMs
Right.
and for domains that have separate TP. If they want, send us the TP address and hostname.
And another thing, along with this, it would be also very good to just update the list of responsible people in various handlers for the BOD.
Yeah.
I mean, if we can have all this information together coming to us, it would be, yes, I believe it will be you. But anyway, it's kind of interesting because we can have this in our operation center, and then we can simply contact the handler and ask, okay, say we see your domain is
Definitely.
down, and then shall we do
Definitely.
something, or because so we can improve the.
I don't know if the MDSD
This
has this
kind.
information, but in case they don't have it, that's really useful.
I think it would be good to refresh it anyway.
There's a list.
Okay.
I'm not sure it's been updated in the recent months.
Okay.
Okay.
That's okay.
It will be easy. it will be easy to check the IDMs because the IDMs are open towards at least some the portal instance or some central. But for the TPs, the common scenario is that they are hosted in a different machine, which is not open.
Okay, even in
it
ICM.
can only contact the local IDM instance, for example.
Okay,
So it's a more
okay,
difficult
then
case.
yeah, that falls into the scenario of NSCA.
So basically, you don't require anything from the NRENs
An
apart
IP
from
address,
an IP address
yes,
For-
to begin with.
to begin with. Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Then I guess now the next presentation.